Welcome to PSI Foundation, and before we begin, I would like to say just a few words why is this meeting so important for us, especially in Limassol in context of Cyprus today. From the late 1950s, Cyprus became a unique ground for experimentation in architecture and urban planning. After independence, the country was searching for a new architectural identity beyond its colonial past. At the same time, Limassol itself was developing in a very unusual way, as a chain of villages stretches along the coastline that gradually evolved into the city. Some of these urban ideas were successful, while others create new challenges, but together they formed the very particular landscape of Limassol that we know today, a city that continues to transform through redevelopment, tourism, migration, and arrival of new communities. For us, these questions are both deeply personal and highly relevant today. This is why last year, PSI Foundation launched the project Tecton, dedicated to researching Cypriot modernism through the example of Karab warehouse building, where we are gathering tonight. This building emerged around the moment of Cyprus' independence and became a part of new architectural language for the country. In many ways, it reflects both ambitions and the unresolved questions of that period. That is why we are especially happy to welcome Andrés Jaque this evening. His work explores the relationship between architecture, society, environment, and everyday life, themes that resonate strongly with the transformation Cyprus and we experience today. I would also like to warmly thank Alexis Papadopoulos, who initiated this meeting, as well as the Cyprus Architects Association, with whom we are co-organizing this event. And finally, a few words about the PSI Foundation. PSI Foundation is an independent non-profit cultural institution founded in 2024 with the aim to support and develop contemporary art and culture in Cyprus. We support Cyprus Pavilion at Venice Biennale, working with foreigner and Cypriot artists to promote art and connect them with wider social environment. At PSI Foundation, up to the August 1st, you can experience the exhibition of Bill Viola. If you still didn't saw it, please enjoy, and thank you for coming, and please help me to welcome Andrés Jaque.
Well, thank you very much for these very warm and generous introductions, and thank you very much for the presence, the mayor, the president of the Architects Association. I'm very honored to be here, and thank you to all of you for being here. I will go actually quite fast. I would like to present some of the concepts and research that we've been working on, and how they are deeply connected and inseparable, I could say, with the design work that we do at the Office for Political Innovation of Pauline from both New York and Madrid. The title of this lecture is Transscalar Architecture. This is something that is very important for us. It's a notion that we have championed and that comes from a deep reading of how architecture actually operates. This is a photograph of one of the most the least photographed part of one of the most photographed modern architectures, which is namely the Barcelona Pavilion by Mies van der Rohe and Lili Reich in Barcelona in 1929, that was later dismantled in the last pieces in 1930, and it was reconstructed in the 1980s based on the drawings and the records and the photographs that MoMA preserves. When we see this, it's actually difficult to understand that this is actually a two-story building. It was reconstructed with this big basement that occupies the entire footprint of the pavilion. The reason why the original pavilion has a small basement already that was crucial for its sanitary system actually to operate and to be fixed and registered. But the second pavilion was actually expanding that so that the maintenance of the building, the mechanical systems and their maintenance would not basically interrupt the flow of visitors, which is a big part of what makes the pavilion feasible, financially feasible. This is, however, for me very interesting, because when we look at the basement, everything that is needed for the pavilion to be used as a daily construction, the daily life of the pavilion can only exist through the things that you find in the basement. So somehow for the pavilion to be useful, it requires a microwave oven where the employees warm up their lunch. It requires place to storage and to make invisible actually all the elements that are needed for the functioning of the pavilion as a site for events, the chairs that are used during the lectures, many other things, but also the actual production and fabrication of the pavilion, the pieces of the travertine marble that get broken and need to be refixed, they somehow live in the basement. The basement is crucial. It's like a Dorian Gray painting that allows for the upper floor to be seen as non-needed of maintenance, never aging, an instant reproduction that is freezing forever the morning of May 1929 when the pavilion was opened. But that's of course a fiction, and that fiction is produced out of the action of the basement. This is, for instance, very interesting for me. The travertine slabs have their porous open. That's very important for the expressivity of the materiality of the pavilion. That was an insistence of Mies van der Rohe. But of course, in a climate like Barcelona's, where it rains a lot, the mud on the surface of the travertine, it's dragged to the porous. Then it creates kind of a little ecosystem where plants and moss root, and those roots end up breaking the travertine. So once a month, there's a person that comes to the pavilion and fixes the slabs that got broken. There's 10% more slabs, so that there's a permanent recirculation of the slabs of the pavilion. The pavilion is actually like an Argonaut construction, which is in permanent reconstruction. It exists not as a frozen piece of architecture, but as a flow, as a permanent reconstruction. For instance, these are the curtains, the red curtains, after a few months. And these are the curtains after a year, when they're taken to the basement, are replaced, and they are replaced by new red curtains. So basically, this is how the pavilion should be known. But if you visit, how many of you have been in Barcelona visiting this pavilion? Okay, how many of you visited the basement? Probably not, right? So this tells us a lot about how architecture ended up being addicted to this illusion that things can be just minimalistic, can be perfect, and the cost of that, which is mostly evacuating its liveliness, turning the quotidianity, the daily life of architecture, something that we tend to erase. The part that for me is most interesting is this corner of the basement, and it's the place where Cat Niebla lived. This is Cat Niebla, and she sadly passed during COVID, but I really followed her life for many years. She was taken very young to the pavilion because there were mice, and someone thought that mice were not nice to have in a place designed by Mies van der Rohe. So they brought Cat Niebla. She was not called Niebla. At the beginning, she didn't even have a name. Niebla came because he had these blurred eyes. And actually, that blurred eyes is something that was a kind of a transformation of her eyes, that by being in the darkness of the basement, she developed this macular atrophia that you see in these yellow points in her eye, and she became blind before she died. So it's very interesting for me because she had to be invisibilized because no one wanted to state that the pavilion could even have mice, that the possibility of the pavilion having mice could even exist. So she was kept in the basement. by being in the darkness of the basement, she was transformed by the pavilion and she became blind to mist. So if everyone is blind to the basement, she became mist-blind. And for me, what is very important about the story of Cat Niebla is that it teaches a lot about how architecture operates. We tend to think that architecture is the provision of a box, like we do containers, and then society comes in, right? Bodies, people, cats come in. But it never works like that. We believe that we design the container, but we're also designed by the container. We are produced by architecture. Architecture, from a contemporary perspective, now that we know more about how societies operate, how technology operates, how post-human studies help us understand that bodies are fully designed, we understand that architecture is actually reflectivity. And that's what that also have implications of how we design. We were asked by the Mies van der Rohe Foundation to do a design for the pavilion, a temporary design within the pavilion. And what we said, design is not creating boxes. Katsuyo Sejima had, for instance, created a little bubble of plastic prior to us. He was the one that was invited to intervene the pavilion before us. And we said, we don't want to create a new container within the pavilion. For us, design is the rearticulation of the social. And what we did was change what would be the distribution of entities within the pavilion. Many things that used to be in the basement, we took them to the first floor. And by doing that, we transformed not only the aesthetics of the pavilion, but how it operated. For instance, in order that all this equipment kept being functional and used every day, that means that the process of maintaining the building, cleaning it, became incredibly visible, and it was visible for the visitors. So we transformed the perception and even the roles that people working in the pavilion would have. The cleaning staff would become the actual curators of the pavilion. For me, this is a work that it's been allowing my office and myself to explain that there's a fundamental shift in how we think of architecture now. Architecture is no longer a neutral actor, but is the making of the social. It's not hosting the social, it's the actual production of the societal relationships by which we negotiate with each other the production of the collective. That's something that means that the politics that we are also enacting now are not just those of the spoken words. It's not how politicians debate in the parliament. It's also how our environment is creating specific relationships that are making more likely some realities and are preventing other realities from being likely. This is what, for many people like Isabel Stengers, could be included in the term cosmopolitics. How we build our world is how we enact politics now. Constructing is, as Heidegger would claim actually, the way societies are producing themselves and being produced. And that's for me what makes projects, architecture, not that much the making of containers, but the actual articulation of the eco-social. I would like to now talk about scale more in detail, because for me scale is the key to architecture now. And how many of you know this movie? Can you? Okay, so this is the 1977 movie Powers of 10 by Charles and Ray Eames, produced in Chicago, in Los Angeles, but claiming to be the zoom out from this picnic, this lazy afternoon, as they say. And it's basically a scalar progression from the genes and the atoms and neutrons in the hand of this guy to the universe and the cosmos. This progression is meant to be non-discontinual, indicating that everything is the result of a single continuous design, that everything makes sense, everything is somehow interconnected, everything is smoothly coordinated. But that's something that make us think what the images were doing. And of course, the images, we've done a lot of research on them. They're the result of the Cold War, and they were operating in this contradiction of claiming society to be threatened by a possible war at any moment, and at the same time depicting the American society as a happy one. What they were doing was framing the social. And if we look at their work, the frame that we find here, let me show you again. The frame, this square frame that is showing us how the universe is coordinated across scales, this white square that happens to show there, is actually something that they would do all the time. The images were about framing the social as happy, as American, as, let's say, safe in this happy domesticity. The frames were very literal, and actually they were collecting slides. They were obsessed with framing. And that's not by accident. This came from a very particular place, which is Kees Boeke and his book Cosmic View, the Universe in 40 Jumps. The movie by the images was actually a film version of a book that Kees Boeke produced in the 1940s. Kees Boeke was this architect from the Netherlands, an educator. He was actually the creator of a pedagogy that ended up influencing the whole development of the Montessori pedagogies and pedagogies in the Netherlands. The previous queen of the Netherlands was actually educating the Kees Boeke pedagogies. He was basically someone that was thinking that societies needed to be designed, and that makes him so interesting. But it's in his history, or his trajectory is inseparable from the fact that he was married with Cathy Cadbury that you see here. And Cathy Cadbury, of course, is the daughter of one of the founders of Cadbury chocolates. Cadbury chocolates, of course, were inspirational for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. They were very influential in the making of the British daily life. And when we look at their ideologies, from a contemporary perspective, it's inevitable to see how problematic they were. The idea that their chocolate was absolute pure, therefore best, was an idea that was made normal in the British Empire through the development of industrial ventures like Cadbury. Actually, Betty and Kees lived for many years in one of the Cadbury company towns. And what for me is very interesting is that Kees Boeke wrote later a book called Democracy as It Should Be. And in this book, he could claim that democracy has proved to be slowing down societies, that was preventing societies from being centered and focused. What he would claim is that the broad representation of minorities should be replaced by the rule of the majority, and that representation democracies should be prevented because they were making societies incapable of operating rapidly enough. And that was coming from a reflection of his experience in the company towns that were run by the Cadbury company. Of course, we could recognize that these were not democratic towns. They were basically towns that were managed by a corporation, and that therefore there was no representation of their citizens in the decision making. When we look at the movie again, if we think of the movie, what the second invention, so if the first is the frame, this device to focus the social, to center it, the second is the zoom. The zoom is, you see here one of the first modern zooms of the 1950s, but the zoom is a very interesting technology. If you look at it, the zoom, of course, was crucial in the culture, in popular culture in the 1950s and 60s. It was photographed as equally important as the American flag, because all the Apollo missions took zooms like this to the space. The actual images of the blue marble were taken with one of these ingenious zoom that was invented in the 1950s. Nixon got photographed with a zoom in the White House, and he was photographed like that for Life magazine. So it's difficult for us to know, to understand now how important in popular culture was the zoom. The zoom was modernity, was the new thing, was the thing that was making everyone connected to technology. But what is interesting is that both Nixon wanted to be photographed as a zoom man, but also the Nouvelle Vague. Visconti would say that zoom was the invention that allowed him to connect what was very, very local to the general functioning of a situation, and prevented, by the way, him to need to walk from one thing to another. It was almost every single director of the Nouvelle Vague found the zoom cool, and it's the language of the Nouvelle Vague for those that are familiar with this moment in the history of cinema. When we look at the zoom, like the engineers, we see that actually the continuity between different focal distances is actually a fantasy. What the zoom is actually just a very simple transitioning from different lenses, which is covered by an aluminum case painted in black most of the times, that is hiding that actually there's a discontinuity in how the transitioning across scales happens from one lens to the next one. This is something very similar to what was happening in the movie of the images. This is part of the research we did in the Congress, in the Library of the Congress in Washington, where we found that many things would be removed from this transitioning. When they were working on the storyboard, for instance, at one point, they had a cell that could be attacked, that was being attacked by a virus. And then there's this, it was crossed, those are the letters, the handwriting, that's the handwriting of Charles Eames that would say virus, is this a virus? And then he removed it. What is very important is when we see that's the virus then, when we see the movie, the possibility of this smooth scalar transition in the narration that connects from the genes to the cosmos as a kind of automatic displacement that the zoom is supposed to make possible, which, by the way, is how we understand the space now. Basically, Google Maps is the result of this movie. This is the archaeology of how we ended up navigating and doing this all the time in our phones, right? But it's basically at the stake of removing a big part of what makes reality participated by minorities and a broad representation of everything that exists. This is a reenactment that we did a few years ago of this movie, Powers of 10, that we did Superpowers of 10, that was actually showing everything or many things that was not included in the frame. For instance, these are some of the images that we produced at that time. But for instance, the fact that even though Charles Eames was desperate to eliminate the possibility of a deceased body to be part of this film, the actual narrator, this is the polio virus, the actual narrator, the person that gives the voiceover of the film, William Morrison, was actually he was suffering polio when he was a kid, and he ended up in a wheelchair. Not only that, when we show the connection of this lazy afternoon with the outer space, we don't see the military technology that was crucial in what Philip Morrison developed. Philip Morrison, the scientific advisor of the film, was actually the person who led the Manhattan Project, one of the leading scientists that developed the atomic bomb. He put himself with his own hands one of the bombs that was thrown on Hiroshima. He actually after that would become, after visiting as a scientific expert that was sent by the US military forces to inspect on site the effects of the bomb, he became an anti-nuclear power activist, and he was the founder of Los Alamos, a scientific group that claimed that the US would be destroyed by its relationship with atomic bombs. If we look at the grass of the picnic, the grass was basically the invention of Monsanto that patented these grass seeds, brilliant, that could reduce what normally would have the biodiversity of a lawn that normally has at least 500 species of different forms of grass into forms of ecosystem that only have a maximum 15 species. That was a design that, of course, was, when we see the picnic in the movie, we don't understand that that's the site of a huge exclusion, biological and ecological exclusion. When we look at the film, the actual film in which the movie was shot, the ectachrome was calibrated according to the skin of Cindy, an employee from Kodak, that was used, that this very white woman, that was used across the world everywhere to calibrate films, Kodak films. This was basically, and that was making, and these are images distributed by anti-syndicate activists, that was making non-white people literally invisible, non-photographable, basically people that could not be photographed through the use of the syndicate. When we look at the hand and the immediate identification of the gender performance of this guy with his genes, it's inevitable to remember that in 1977, Los Angeles was a site for huge trans activism, that the film industry had already produced a large number of movies that were claiming that gender was not necessarily binary. And actually, there was a large number of activist groups that were operating in the US, and many of those in LA. All these are the stories that are complicating the society that the images were producing through something that I would claim was one of the most impactful pieces of architecture of the 1970s, the film Powers of 10, that was used in schools for kids to understand what space was about. And at the same time, it was a device that was disputing, participating not in one, but in a large number of disputes, gender, racial, ecological, anti-military, that were flourishing in the US at the time that that movie was circulated. This is, for instance, collaborations that we've done with trans activists across the world that were actually old enough to have been active already in the 1970s. When we saw these photographs, we're showing the huge multitude of exclusions that were never included in the film Powers of 10, that were actively evacuated from reality at a time that all of these realities were incredibly visible in the front page of the newspapers. This is something that, and this is, for instance, that we work with Bruno Latour. This is the last exhibition he did before he died, where we presented, that was open with Powers of 10. And I want to show this because somehow this is where contemporary thinking is understanding, in my opinion, the next steps for architecture. And the next steps for me for architecture are very much working with this collectiveness and understanding that architecture is a vehicle not that much for focusing and centering and optimizing, but rather to provide a broader inclusivity of the realities that our communities, our societies are sensitive to. This is something, of course, that I've also done as a curator, for instance, but I think that, and that was Manifesta that we did in Palermo with Ippolito Pestellini, Bretke van der Haag, and Miriam Baradis. But it's something that somehow is a dispute. Many of the architects here probably know what this is, right? Are you familiar with the self-cleaning glass? The self-cleaning glass is basically an evolution of the low iron glass, and it didn't exist 15 years ago. If you look at what corporate power looks like now, this is the image of it. If you think, for instance, of the Apple stores, are basically a celebration of low iron self-cleaning glass. The staircases, the elevators, the cylinders, the facade, it's all this glass, right? This is a type of shininess that didn't exist before. This is the vessel in New York, and probably all of you who have been here recognize that this is not the same type of shininess that we could see in chrome finishing, in polished metals in the past. It's very different. It's produced with titanium oxide. You probably remember that for a year, the edge of the iPhones had this shininess, right? And it was advertised as titanium. Titanium is the aesthetics of corporate power now. When we examine titanium at a molecular level, that's what it looks like. Titanium has such a perfect masonry. It's very well compiled, right? It allows for a very smooth surface. It also means that it reflects very well the sun. The combination of its smoothness and the reflection of the sun makes that particles that are on the surface of titanium first get reduced by the action of the sun and its reflection to smaller particles, and then they're easily wiped down by the rain. And that's the effect that keeps the material shiny, and that's why it's claimed to be self-cleaning. This is the installation that we presented in the Venice Biennial that was curated by Leslie Loco, where we basically claimed that if you want to understand what is happening with the buildings in Hudson Yards, these corporate buildings that retain this shininess through the year, you have to understand that this is the product of many different designs that are coordinated and that are making Hudson Yards inseparable to Coloveni. This is the aesthetics of corporate power now. You probably recognize those that are more familiar with how glass is being represented in renderings, and you probably recognize this whiteness and shininess of the glass. It's very different from how glass buildings were represented and photographed 50 years ago. They were much more reflecting, they were less transparent, they were less shiny actually. These are actual photographs. These are the aesthetics of power now. These are photographs from Ivan Vam. He sent his photographs to me and said, I never managed to have these ones accepted by any editor. They said they're too sordid. And I agree with him, they're too sordid. The titanium actually comes from a very particular place, Coloveni in South Africa. It's one of the few places in the world where titanium can be found in a concentration enough so that it's worth extracting. But titanium, for those that are not familiar with the mining of titanium, is mixed with sand. It's not extracted in deep mines, but it's rather taken from the sand on the surface. Actually, this is a sand that is very heavy because of the presence of titanium. Once the titanium particles are removed, the sand is placed back in the same location, but then it's very volatile. It no longer has the particles of titanium holding it on the ground. This volatility, and this is a model that we created to explain the connection between Hudson Yards and this, means that the farms get dusty. The trees die, the animals die, the people get affected in their lungs, they are developing diseases that in the past were only found among miners, and that's basically forcing the move of communities in rural areas like Coloveni to cities like Johannesburg, where they are actually forced to live in the streets. So what we see here is that architecture is distributed, is politically the result of moving things from places like Coloveni and Hudson Yards to each other. The shininess of Hudson Yards is inseparable from the dustiness of Coloveni. Titanium and the self-cleaning glass is a way to channel benefits from one location to another. We can produce more shininess, we can concentrate shininess in one part of the world, but that's going to be at the stake of the dustiness of other places, other locations. Our architecture is actually intended to do the other way around, to redistribute and to create forms of transscalar justice. This is, for instance, a very small project, like Goliath and David thing in New York. New York is a place where the sewage system is organized so that there's a capacity for the city to accumulate the waste of the sewage system in wastewater treatment plants like this. This is Newton Creek. As a result, there's a slurry that is everyday produced and that is taken in these trains that are the poo trains, they're called the poo trains actually, to Alabama. Alabama is paid, a poor state like Alabama is paid to get every day the waste of New York City, meaning that this waste is mixed with the soil of Alabama, and progressively Alabama is becoming more and more and more toxic. Whereas New York is claiming to be close to get their water swimmable, have clean air, have clean earth. Waste doesn't disappear, as many people remind us, and it's a matter of finding ways to deal with it, either sending it elsewhere or dealing with it locally. Our proposal is very different. We created Cosmo, this machine, as a way to keep the waste on site. It's a plug-in, it's even a piece of furniture, and that's why I wanted to explain it, of urban furniture that we plug in the sewage system and takes the wastewater, makes it circulate through a series of artificially engineered ecosystems that are making it possible for different species to contribute to transform and metabolize the waste. We constructed it for MoMA, in the courtyard of MoMA PS1 in Queens. We plug it to the sewage system, and in 1 week was capable of turning the water of the sewage system drinkable. What for me is important is not only that we could create, and it was based on and we worked with John Todd, the ecology expert from the 1960s, and the inventor of these eco machines, but we worked with him to take his research much farther. And what was important for me is first that it was also the opposite of what we saw in Cat Niebla. This was a trans-species alliance, but one where everyone would get a benefit. The species of plants and bacteria and fungi that we mobilized were actually finding a habitat in the waste, in what would be toxic for humans would be the good habitat for them. And by metabolizing what would kill humans, they actually grew and made a living. That's what for me is important. The difference of the social, the assemblage of the minorities can be engineered, can be designed, so that actually the diversity and the difference, the lack of focus, the lack of centrality and exclusion is what allows for a distributed and shared well-being. The second thing is that politics do not have to be, let's say, a problem. They can be also, no input sign, no? Okay, sorry, when I talk about politics, the sign out. Okay. This was actually like a gigantic mirror ball. We organized parties around them. This was like a disco, actually. It was actually not separated. What you see here is the blue color is the light that was produced by bacteria that were living in the pipes, in the hoses. Bacteria that need a particular quality in the water can only develop in moments of let's say, a water that is very clean. And they were indicated, and they developed photoluminescence. And they basically, by glowing, they will show that the water was already drinkable for humans, or suitable for humans to drink. One of the most important challenges that we live in actually is this, how we think beyond the human. How we, when we think of the social, and we were looking today at the city, right, and the importance of the presence of plants, the water, the earth, the pollution. How do we think beyond the human, and we think of design as more than human? That is, for instance, what actually Mies van der Rohe was doing by all those that thought that had to follow the Mies van der Rohe lesson, and they thought the pavilion should never have mice, and then they brought the cat, so design is always a design of how different species relate to each other. Our notion of the social, in a moment of huge drops of biodiversity, where we understand also the complexity of our bodies as inseparable from other species, in facing climate crisis, it's not just a, let's say, social, human-only social body. Our bodies are transhuman. And that means that even from a very selfish perspective, we have to think across species. And the current urbanisms are urbanisms that are discussed, designed, tested as more than human urbanisms. That is key for everything that we're doing. And for instance, this is the Biennale that we did in Shanghai recently, Bodies of Water, and it's at the center of many of the architecture that we do. This is the Rambla Climate House, for instance, which is a very small prototype that is operating at the scale of the whole ecosystem, and it's not only catering to humans. This is what is important. It's an architecture that understands that catering to humans now is impossible without catering to the entire ecosystemic life that is more than human. This is the landscape of the Ramblas in southern Spain. The Ramblas are these ravines that are carved by the very fast rain in the summer, and that become, in very dry ecosystems that are almost desertic, become the lines, the veins, where life accumulates and climate can be tempered. And basically these are the ravines in the landscape. The destruction of the ravines since the 1950s to massive cheap urbanization that, instead of following the lines of the landscape, were basically flatten the land and destroy these veins of biodiversity and climate tempering, was basically interrupting the flow of water in this landscape. We designed this house for Murcia is a region that has for decades has had governments that were not sensitive to environmental needs and were not sensitive to the destruction of the ravines. So the civil society organized in small groups of people that were trying to find alternatives to central power and network of actions that could somehow test different ways to deal with the ravines. This is the house that we designed for one of these activists, with the collaboration of many of the groups that are working there, and scientists and ecologists from the School of Alicante, to design a house that could work repairing the ravine by collecting the rainfall and the gray waters of the house, and creating a system of sensors within the ravine that would indicate what's the moment that the acidity of the ground would be raising, and therefore would activate this ground of artificial climatology that would progressively reconstruct the ravine. This is actually the way the house we depicted the house as a house that is not necessarily only inhabited by this human that take a shower there, but rather organized so that its users, its dwellers, the beneficiaries of the action of the architecture is the entire ecosystem with the ravines. This is what the reconstructed ravine looks like. For us, it's very important, this photograph that ended up circulating all around and making to the front page of many, many architectural magazines, because it was not a kind of pristine and idealized version of nature. It's not like a Pierre Tudolph garden. It's one that retains a big part of the trash that can be found in these ravines that have been polluted for decades now. It's also showing that it's in the making. It's showing a very much of a broken ecosystem, but an ecosystem that is being repaired. I think this condition of architecture, rather than providing functionality, engaging in processes of reparation, an architecture that is not prioritizing the interest of the humans and turning the rest of the other forms of life, the more than human forms of life, sacrificable to provide benefit to humans. And an architecture that is not, let's say, producing idealized images, but making reparation in progress, is what probably is the contemporary condition of architecture that we're interested in. Life here for humans becomes much more a process of reparation and observation of that reparation. And this is, for instance, an image that I love. It was an image that I got as a text message a few months ago, where basically they saw that this type of snakes that have disappeared from this ravine and were crucial, very well known by the people living here, were back in the ravine by the action of the house. So architecture has the possibility of not only catering to humans. I would say that architecture understands now that human life depends on the collective survival of many different species, of the ecosystem at large. And the process of architecture, what architecture can provide now is a form of trans-species justice. This is a poster we did for Maya Hoffman and Hans-Ulrich Choris, who asked a series of artists to contribute with a claim of what was urgent. What we would claim is what is urgent, it's that architects provide some form of trans-species justice. And this means that togetherness needs to be redefined. The togetherness that architects produce now is definitely not the togetherness of the Cold War. It's not the togetherness that privileged a part of the society. It's a kind of earthy togetherness, I would say, a muddy togetherness. And that was the origin of this project, that is the Radio School, that we designed in Matveev a few years ago, and that it's a project where we could take many of these ideas further. Normally, schools look like this. This is, if you Google floor plan of a school, you get something like this. Typologically, they're very dispersed, like octopus-like systems, normally very low, so that they can maximize their capacity to create enclosures. And these enclosures are normally monofunctional enclosures, like this is a court, this is a patio, a playground, this is a football match, this is a basketball complex, this is a football complex, this is wherever. But the key is that there's tiny monofunctional societies outdoors that are protected and enclosed by low architecture. What we did is actually to propose the opposite. A vertical architecture that would make first no distinction between the spaces of education and the spaces of leisure. Everything could be educational, everything should be fun, but vertical in a way that the school would not have a playground. It would not be comprising a space and segregating the kids that were educating from the rest of society. The process of education was actually a process of being exposed to the public, to the diversity that composes the social and the eco-social. The school therefore became more like a vertical stacking of all this, and we were advising where to allocate the school, and we were crucial in advising the promoters of the school, which was a cooperative of teachers, to do it in a place where there was a large public park, so that the school would actually be using and mobilizing public space as the space where the students would be exposed to the social and would be exposed to the complexity of the city and their neighbors as a way of being educated in diversity rather than segregation. This park happened to be the former landfill of the city, a space that was actually polluted, being repaired, a site that we would claim would need an architecture that could contribute to its reparation. This is a video taken by one of the teachers the first day that the doors of the building were open and the kids could go into the public space of the park to be exposed to this diversity. And it's very interesting that also it saved what happened in the neighbor buildings. The building that you see on this side, right there, is a residency for elder people. And now they have foldable chairs that they take at the moment of the break. So they basically love to spend time with the children from the school. For me, these kind of processes of education, rather than segregation and seclusion and control of the relationships among homogeneous members of the society, being replaced by the exposure to the public and to the diversity that the city comprises, is crucial. But the second component is that this is a site that requires reparation. And the building is organized so that it's a machine for ecological reparation. Through the building, there's a series of small gardens like this. This is actually the biggest, that were designed with two ecologists, Álvaro Mingo and Jorge Basarrate, who designed parks that had the capacity to bring the species that were needed to repair the toxicity of the park and might metabolize it and bring back its biodiversity. So spaces like this, which are spaces of aggregate or kind of functional spaces of the school, are inseparable from gardens like this that are specific, that are very normal, but are very carefully designed for these processes of reparation. Let me show you others. This is, for instance, how the water, the rainfall, is collected in the roofs and then is kept and retained in this series, in this system of gardens. All of them are very modest and very, in a way, not that impressive. I mean, now they're grown a lot and they're very nice. This is like a jungle now. But some of them are as simple as this, a little crack with plants in the building. The most important part, and the one that took us more time, is the facade. I'm very happy because the facade won the award of the best facade in the Architects Newspaper Awards annual. And it's a facade that we fully developed with a company called BPEC, which is a very small family-run business. This is a facade of many layers of cork that is mixed with natural resins mostly for different trees, that in a gradient that allowed for the core, is very thick, it's like this, the core to be very impermeable, but the surface becomes very porous. What is important is that this is part of a series of actions that are intended to repair the whole ecosystem, and that became even the focus of the pedagogy. So this is the daily pedagogy of the school, where recognizing the plants that live around them, the insects, taking samples of the bacteria, looking at them in the microscope, becomes a fundamental part of the education. Actually, this is a photograph, for instance, of the school itself became an object of pedagogy. And this is, for instance, a photograph by a kid that says, "My school is like a robot made out of butter." And this butter is very important for us because the butter is allowing for life, this cork is a host for life. That's why we designed it like this. As opposed to this, this is the liver house by SOM, that is, I would claim, is a detail that was developed to prevent life from being mixed, like secluding those that work for the liver company from the outside, to the extent that the CEO of the company could claim, "I don't want my employees to breathe the same air than the rest of people in Manhattan, and that was translated into this design. Our construction details are like this. The construction details that we develop are welcoming the fungi to develop their mycelium, to connect the facade with the earth, hosting all forms of plants to grow. The mycelium became the host for bacteria. The bacteria gets into the pipes and end up connected to the gardens inside the building. This is, we've been tracking what happens with the facade with the Center of High Scientific Research in Madrid, with Asunción de los Ríos, the team that she leads. This is the facade. 2 weeks later, what look like hairs here are already the mycelium of many fungi that are getting into the pores of the cork and are developing these highways. I would refer to them. This is how the mycelium basically grows within the cork. These are images that we took, that we've been basically recording and taking. This is basically how the cork allows for the mechanical development of these roots. The cork is very important because there's a reason for the cork to be used in wine. It's because it's very good at hosting communities of bacteria. It contributes to the fermentation of the wine. Because very soon, many of the cells of the cork die and remain dead, as you see here, the empty ones. And those are very tiny pores that allowed for the fungi to anchor on their walls, which of course, as we know, mycelium is very fragile. It requires some anchoring, otherwise it's whipped out and broken by the water very easily. What we see in these images is already bacteria colonizing these tiny circles within the dead cells of the core, already colonies of bacteria. Bacteria have a crucial capacity to metabolize pollution and increase the quality of the air. What is very important is that the mycelium are crucial because they keep a very thin film of water, very optimized on the surface, allowing bacteria to use the mycelium as a highway, what is called the mycelium highway, getting them deep into the core. The mycelium produce also vitamin B at the end of the mycelium, which is crucial for the survival of the mycelium. So it's a symbiotic relationship for the mycelium to thrill. They also need the bacteria to use their film to move to the depth of the cork. This is already communities of bacteria creating three-dimensional matrices that are where they inject their DNA and produce a collective genetics. It's a form of collective intelligence that travels through the mycelium. And I will show you another video that is very good with that. These are the matrices. You see those little balls connected. It's a form of collectiveness where they mix their DNA. You see there. And so they no longer operate as individuals. So when we see a school like this, the surface, the facade, is not a passive element. It's not just the making of a container. It's inseparable from the reconstruction. What you see here, it's 2 years after the kids working with the mud. And the facade, the gardens, the work of the students is reconstructing the ecosystem around the school. This is, of course, compared to a grown park, it's very modest. But the fact that there's already butterflies there was an indicator. We did these videos because it's the first time that butterflies have been found in this garden. And it's well, you can imagine, the butterflies. But it's an indicator that the architecture is not a passive element. It's an actor that is contributing to the reconstruction of the biodiversity of the school, of the areas around the school. So this is maybe, well, it's maybe okay. We can leave it here. I had more slides and videos. But what I'm trying to say is this. There's a few crucial changes in architecture that come from the fact that architecture is a relational activity. And I think we only can understand it. Can you pass to the next one? Because now this doesn't work. Well, we can leave it here. What I wanted to tell you tonight is this. First, Architecture is eco-social articulation. It's not the making of containers. Nothing that I have explained is passive. Architecture is not just producing a box for things to happen. It's actively mediating in how relationships between different actors are built. Second, this is something that introduces its own forms of politics. And these are politics that have been discussed in architecture for a long time. In the 1970s, the images, who by the way worked for CIA, were very actively mobilizing architecture as a way to reduce diversity, to focus societies, to keep them optimized by eliminating the representation of minorities. This is a story that is not being told and that we have received acritically. We have enjoyed the work of the images. Many of us have images, furniture in our homes and are so happy with this sweet version of domesticity that they promoted, without acknowledging that that is inseparable from the whole violence of exclusion that the Cold War was about. Now we're in a very different moment, and I would claim that the role of architecture is keep working in the articulation of the eco-social, acknowledging that that is what architecture does, not just providing containers. That architecture is, however, never neutral in that work of articulating the eco-social, and that in a moment like this, it's not even about just preserving what exists, but going farther. It's not about sustainability, it's about taking a much more active role in repairing eco-societies to include the more than human realities that are crucial for the survival of our eco-societies. And that means that somehow architecture is doing politics very differently. It's now doing more than human politics in the articulation. Thank you very much.